Very good. So in true Cilla Black moment on Blind Date, who am I, where have I come from? So I'm James Long, so I'm head of technical consulting at the Smart Mobility Living Lab. So we're a real-world testbed. We're a real-world testbed for new forms of mobility in the way that we test different technologies, different services. Both David and Fred alluded to it earlier. There's a network of CAM test beds in the UK, ranging from controlled environments, places like Myra and UTAC, through to real-world environments. We are one of those real-world environments. So we're a real-world environment in East London. We've been very, very deliberate about how we've chosen the location. We recognise that after working for many, many years, it's TRL that led the establishment of the Smart Mobility Living Lab, so the Transport Research Laboratory, as opposed to technology readiness levels that Fred was referring to earlier. We've worked in lots and lots of different programs that over the years have looked at how we evaluate the impact of new technologies, particularly looking at the CAM ecosystem. I'm sure some of you have seen me give presentations before with videos from the 1960s. I'm not going to put you through that right now. However, as part of the formation of the Smart Mobility Living Lab, we really recognised the importance of testing and evaluating new technologies and services where it matters, where it has an impact on people and place. So we've established a test route. We've established that in East London, 2 areas, so one up at the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, the other south of the river in the Royal Borough of Greenwich. And they're very, very different environments, but they've both put mobility at the heart of the regeneration in the area and the future economic opportunity. So we can't put a padlock and a fence around our infrastructure. We can't put a padlock and a fence around the way that we operate the testbed because it's all real roads. So what we've done is we've controlled what we can. We've looked at the safety cases to enable that advanced trialling, but we've also measured everything that we can't control. So we've instrumented that route very, very heavily to gather data, to understand the performance of vehicles, to evidence how they interact with different road users. I should say that we're not just looking at connected and automated mobility. We go well beyond that, looking at micromobility, smart cities applications, and the way that that presents an opportunity to change. So what have we done? We've established a significant test infrastructure, and a test infrastructure which is being used by a range of different organisations. And I can see quite a few of our clients in the room at the moment. I'm not going to say who they are for confidentiality reasons, but very, very happy that they're with us, because this enables us to get people to very, very quickly test higher levels of technology readiness solution out in the real world. They can come to us and have a high intensity testing experience by being right in the centre of our routes. We also recognise that lots of organisations, prior to them getting to an on-the-road status, they want to do a lot of that testing in the simulated environment first. It's expensive to test in the real world. It's complex to test in the real world, particularly to do advanced trialling as we move towards taking the driver out. So being able to provide the simulation environments, the different assets to enable people to look at how you'd look at things like interaction with signals and so on is a big part of that. And then finally, at the far end, we've established an innovation community. No single organisation, I would challenge anybody in this room if they said otherwise, has the answer of where the sector's going. It's that opportunity to come together, to exchange ideas, to challenge one another that gives us that diversity. It's being able to bring together organisations from across the mobility ecosystem to exchange ideas, understand where that goes. So by bringing together around 40 organisations, it's growing. If you want to have a chat about it afterwards, please come and find me. We have the chance to try and bring some of this together. What I'd like to try and talk about today, and the benefit and challenge of being on last, is that there's some great presentations that have gone before us, some really, really good questions earlier. So it's almost an opportunity to respond to some of those. But because of the theme of this session, I want to talk about 3 things, 3 areas where there are certain challenges that, should they be addressed, give us the opportunity to progress the opportunity in this space. So one is around the complexity of space and place. How do we understand how those solutions work, where they're going to be applied? The second is getting the numbers right. What are the sums that we need to do to make this a commercial reality? And then finally, how do we provide confidence to all of those involved in that space? So first of all, and I'm going to skip over the first couple of slides because David did a far more elegant job than I'd be able to in his description. There are many, many, many different forms of connected and automated mobility. There are a few examples on the screen. I'm not going to go through them all, but one thing I wanted to just draw on was we've spoken quite a lot about the operational efficiencies, the potential commercial opportunities from doing things quicker, better, smarter. What I would highlight is that there's also great opportunity in terms of doing things more safely. We put lots and lots of people into places which are higher risk than they perhaps need to be, working by the side of the road, for example, collecting refuse. Are there opportunities to look at those conditions to understand, could we explore that in a different way? Could we understand how we can improve the working experience in those domains? But each of those different applications has a different set of needs. They interact with the environment they're working in a very different way and will be developed as such differently. Then we look at the operating environment. Weird, wonderful, and diverse. Whether we're working on the maritime and port side in controlled environments, whether we're going through to mines and agricultural fields, or whether we're really going to put it through its paces in the bottom right-hand side and top left-hand side, out where you have many, many other uncontrolled actors. Each of these presents its own challenge. What I wanted to go on to next is to talk about some of my children's toys. So my son is 5, and about a year ago, I took this photo for another presentation I was doing. You can see his hands in the top left-hand corner, just about. He was playing with lots and lots of toys, and it presented the perfect example, I think, of transport systems. They're both structured and utterly chaotic at the same time. It has got more chaotic since then, since the year had passed, because he now creates roller coasters and things, and my experience on the Elizabeth line would be somewhat different now if he had introduced that. But it's understanding all the different examples of how changes come about. We've seen massive shocks in the last year, well, the last 3 years, really, with the pandemic, where we've completely changed road space, understanding the way that we allocate it for more bike lanes, for example, or whether it's for dining outside. We don't need massive shocks from pandemics to do that. We've seen all sorts of changes come about from things like e-scooters, for example. In Woolwich, where my office is based for this, e-scooters are still technically illegal, and yet we see hundreds of them every single day. The range of different interactions that has with people on pavements, cyclists, road users, buses, etc., is changing the environment entirely. These changes are evolving all the time. How do we build up evidence to understand, to those golden threads that practically everybody mentioned earlier this morning, about how we build the evidence of understanding that performance is a really, really critical one. That changing environment is a big picture here. The other thing I'd like to point out around space and the way that places are formed is the need to treat it as a system. Nothing here works in isolation at all. Whether we're thinking about the way that we get people onto the Elizabeth line right now, the herds of people moving across in what was a more suburban station through to a much, much more dynamic environment is very, very rapidly changing that environment. So one of the considerations here, to John's point really, how do we treat this as a system? How do we start to bring in Andy's tarmac, understanding particularly the connectivity aspect, to recognise that there's a real evolution? I want to briefly comment on getting the sums right. We have spoken almost exclusively today about vehicles. Very, very few solutions that we get on out there at the moment, if we're thinking about how we get there on the bus, how we get there on the train, is used as a single vehicle. We are thinking about the entire service, the operation of that solution. We're starting to bring into consideration the maintenance, the depoting, the way that we look at the infrastructure costs, and we go all the way through that list. There is a huge amount of interaction between each of those different points that gives us a different understanding of what's going to add up commercially. I would put it to everybody in this room at the moment that I don't think we have an adequate enough understanding of the whole life costs of different forms of getting people or goods from A to B. Whether we're adding up the competition to something like a light rail service, what might the opportunity be? Once we have a better understanding of that and an evidenced opportunity, then we can start to look at what that would really take. What difference could that make in terms of bringing better connectivity to many of the cities in the north, which are horribly underserved right now? The final point is around the pathways to building confidence. We heard huge amounts this morning about the different evidence that might be required to demonstrate safety and so on. Ultimately, my view is that we have some very, very human, emotional experiences that lots and lots of different people at different levels are going to have to take to understand how we get connected and automated mobility on the road. Whether it's politicians signing on a dotted line to say, yes, I'm happy for that policy to go forward, that regulation's fit for purpose, whether it's the licensing body and the local authority signing a piece of paper, whether it's an investor that's starting to understand, I'm really prepared to put the farm on the line to put this forward, whether it's people like me putting my kids in the back of it. What's going to motivate me to do that? There are big and small decisions. Is my lunch going to arrive there? Is it going to be hot when it arrives? All of these different considerations come through. How do we provide the assurances necessary? What's the evidence that people are going to come to expect associated with this? We're looking at this through a variety of different routes. Unfortunately, the headings haven't quite mapped across correctly. But looking at that assurance from the product level, whether it's going through the certification point, but then critically once it's in life. Once things are out in the wild, how are they performing? How do we gather that evidence? How do we ensure that's available to inform both future development, but also the regulators? I'm going to draw a line there, but thank you very much for listening.